All right, now there is more information that's coming in terms of breaking news in the ballistic missile strikes that the Iranians have carried out. The figures of casualties are now out. These are preliminary numbers that are being put out by the Israelis. An Iranian ballistic missile struck a two-storied home in the northern city of Tamra, east of Haifa, killing one woman and injuring at least 14 others. This is according to the first responders. And Israel's emergency services have said that an Iranian missile hit on a home in the country's Haifa region, and this left 14 people injured, including one in a critical condition. And teams have now reported about 14 casualties at a two-storied home in the western part of Galilee, including one in the critical condition and the rest with varying levels of injury. Israel's Magen David Adom agency has said in a statement. All right, now joining us over the phone line, we've got our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us from New York. Susan, we heard that Donald Trump had a phone call with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, where the two leaders talked extensively about this escalating, attacks between Israel and Iran. Give us a sense of what in fact transpired in the course of that phone call, and what did Donald Trump say about the possibility of trying to get an off-ramp to bring down the tensions between Iran and Israel?
So a roughly 50 to 6-minute call described as being very cordial and constructive. Putin wished Donald Trump a happy 79th birthday. It's the president's birthday today. Both leaders agreed that this war in Israel, Iran should end. This is according to President Trump. Putin strongly condemned Israel's strikes on Iran, warning of dangerous escalation. We heard similar sentiments from Russian ambassador to the UN yesterday at the Security Council. Trump acknowledged the strike's effectiveness, but shared concerns, saying that they are very alarming. Ukraine war was discussed. Trump pressed Putin for his war in Ukraine to end soon and called for follow-up talks next week. They also talked about an ongoing prisoner exchange between Russia and Ukraine. Putin offered Russia as a mediator and expressed willingness to revive U.S.-Iran nuclear talks, likely in Oman. Steve Witkoff, we know Trump's envoy, had been preparing for these nuclear negotiations before it was postponed due to these strikes, and Iran said that, it's not justifiable to go and sit at the negotiating table with the United States. So a lot to unpack during that call, but it's very important that Putin called President Trump. One has to wonder whether or not Iran insisted that Russia call Iran, hoping, some sort of halt to these strikes could possibly happen.
All right. Interesting. Now, one of the other aspects I want you to weigh in on, Susan, is the statement that was given by the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. He said that he wished President Donald Trump a happy birthday. He called the American president a man with a very clear vision. And he also went on to state such things that the Israeli leaders always state, that the friend of America is the friend of Israel, the enemy of America is an enemy of Israel. But Netanyahu also mentioned something very interesting. He said that the leadership of the Ayatollah regime is packing its bags and is planning to leave Tehran, clearly indicating that the Israeli objective at this moment is a regime change in Iran. To what extent do you think this is an idea that the Israelis under Netanyahu would be able to sell to Donald Trump?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. I mean, the fact that Israel has been very vocal in the past 24 hours about this sort of messaging that your leadership is weak right now, go to the street, we are not against the Iranian people, we are against the Iranian regime. And interestingly, you see those sentiments coming out of Iran as well. You don't see Iranians outside around the world hanging out around Israeli embassies or offices or whatnot and protesting this strike, the way that you would see with other countries possibly that has happened before. So that's a very telling statement. How much intelligence has that this may be a possibility, that this is possibly the underlying goal ultimately? We can't really, everyone can predict, but no one wants to say it out loud at this point until we figure out what happened with these strikes. But, if there is some kind of agreement I mean, the United States has not been shy in assisting regime change in different countries. So I can only wonder if this will be any different, and especially if America's national security interests are at risk. And, you know, Fordo doesn't really come under control, then I think, you know, all bets are off and all options are on the table, as the Americans like to say.
All options, including the military option, which the Americans would want to exercise. Now, speaking of Fordo, what's interesting, Susan, is that the IAEA in its assessment has said that despite the Israeli strikes on the Fordo nuclear facility of the Iranians, it has sustained pretty much no damage whatsoever, either at Fordo or at Khandab. And now it is being said that perhaps the Americans could be more open to striking the Fordo nuclear facility. What are you picking up at your end on these reports?
Yeah, I saw some of those reports. They're very unverified whether or not the United States would get involved. Some are saying that the Israelis have already officially asked the United States. Listen, Donald Trump, for one thing, does not want this to be America's war. The American people have no appetite for a prolonged war. Democrat, Republican, isolationist, globalist, no one wants to get involved in a mess in the Middle East. Now, the off-ramp here, as we like to say, and perhaps the possibility that Iran may get involved, is if somehow, even if it's in a crossfire, American troops' lives are at risk, there is a danger, some kind of attack on American assets and interests in the region hit from Iran, then the United States has already said that. They said that they're going to go ahead and enter the war because it's Americans' lives that are at risk. At this point, it's very unlikely that Donald Trump would just start, you know, having planes take off and go to Fordo and use its bunker busters in the Middle East region, especially for Iran. We do know those bunker busters that Israel talks about and wants. They're not in the Middle East right now. They are in military bases inside the United States. So the Pentagon hasn't made that decision yet.
That's interesting, because you need those big 30,000-pound bunker busters that the Israelis don't have with them, but the Americans have. And this is what the Israelis at this moment want to try and strike at Fordo if they want to be successful. And my quick final question to you at this moment is this. You know, the fact that the Russian president, in fact, spoke with the American president about, you know, the hostilities that have broken out in the Middle East. This clearly shows that there are other world powers that are also looking at this war with a great amount of interest. China, for instance, has condemned the Israeli Operation Rising Lion, saying that this is clearly a violation of international law. This was an act of aggression that infringed upon Iran's sovereignty. To what extent do you think the American president would be willing to take into consideration the pressure that could come from Moscow and Beijing for an off-ramp with respect to Iran?
The question is whether or not Moscow and Beijing, who have had economic interests with Iran in the past, would even stand by Iran if really push comes to shove and they have to choose between the economic consequences and the geopolitical consequences with the United States to defend Iran to that extent or not. Traditionally, historically, Russia has definitely never done that. It changes sides all the time. And with the peculiar situation with the tariffs that China is in, although it's economic beneficial for it to, you know, have the Islamic Republic in power and take their side, and maybe, you know, once in a while veto some Security Council resolutions, it's hard to imagine that they would, that, you know, the United States and these countries would stand against each other to fight over Iran.
That does look like, I mean, if you look at the track record, that could be the pattern in which these countries may behave. Thank you very much, Susan Tehrani, for joining us with all those updates.